Welcome to another edition of Radio Influencers, a podcast series we're doing for Radio Update. I'm your host, Andy Meadows. For this week's episode, I want to discuss how most radio programmers need to drastically adjust their artist separation rules, using Morgan Wallen as an example. And I'll share a snippet of the data we look at each week to show you why. First, let's look at some of the results from our recent Weekly Wire and Weekend Wire Radio Update polls. Unfortunately, Wednesday's Weekly Wire question, do your stations have a 30-day winner rule, bombed. Literally the lowest response we've had so far for a poll question, despite the email having roughly our average open rate. So we'll skip that one since there's not enough engagement to draw any conclusions from the responses. Saturday's, however, did much better. Even though we're recording this on Sunday, we've already had a decent response to this question: which one of these features should on-air personalities stop doing immediately? Celebrity birthdays, Today in History, or Stupid Criminals? Today in History topped the list with 36.2% of the vote, followed by Celeb Birthdays with 33% and Stupid Criminals with 30.9% of the vote. This was inspired by John Lund's Be Topical article on Radio Update, where he struck a nerve with me because he politely mentioned something I've said to every talent I've coached. Stupid Criminals aside, because when done right, it can work, but only if the talent add to the content instead of expecting the story to carry itself. But especially Celebrity Birthdays and Today in History should be put out of their misery. Those segments are filler, the audience doesn't care, and you'd be much better off replacing them with something topical, local, or both. Also, congrats to our top content this week on our Radio Update Top 10. Tracy Johnson, Brian Moore, and Jim Sherwood topped the list. Okay, let's get into today's topic. If you have any questions after watching or listening, email them to me at andy@radiostationconsultant.com or editor@radioupdate.com, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. When I started programming, the general rule was an hour of artist separation on all artists in most formats. Over time, we started to adjust that for our superstars. For instance, here in Texas, during his heyday, you would have a 45-minute separation for George Strait because nobody in Texas complains about you playing too much straight, and the guy had 60-plus number one hits. But those were rare exceptions. Over time, those rare exceptions became the new norm, and we all started to get comfortable with treating the superstars in our formats differently than the majority of artists, which was smart. Not all artists are created equal. Some have considerably larger fan bases than others and put out much more mass appeal music. However, for a long time, we were all uncomfortable pushing those separation rules too tight out of fear the audience would think we're just playing the same handful of artists over and over and complain about the lack of variety on our stations. But as we started to get better data, many of us realized that while our old hour-long artist separation rules did allow us to program a wider variety of artists, which made us feel more comfortable as a programmer because it looked a lot better on paper, it didn't accurately reflect how people were consuming music. In reality, there aren't 40 or 50 new hit songs by 40 or 50 different artists at any given time in any genre. In general, there are roughly 25 to 35 songs, and anywhere from 5 to sometimes 10 of those songs are by the same artist. Because of that, Hot AC, Top 40, and hip-hop all began to loosen up their artist separation rules considerably. Hip-hop, in particular, has been at the forefront of adjusting for how music is actually consumed today. But all of these formats adjusted so much so that at first to us veteran programmers it sounded like a mistake, because stations were literally playing the same artist within a couple of songs, something we only traditionally did on special features like Two for Tuesday or Triple Plays. However, one format lagged behind and to this day is still holding on to some of those outdated artist separation rules: country. This is the perfect week to discuss this because Morgan Wallen's new album just dropped and it sucked all of the air out of the room in country and essentially in music overall. Here's the top 30 overall songs nationally this past week based on data we look at every week. As you can see, Morgan Wallen's got all of the top 4 songs, 7 in the top 10, and 17 songs in the top 30. And keep in mind, this is for all genres, including the biggies like pop and hip-hop. When you look at just country, it's even more incredible. All of the top 10 are Morgan Wallen songs, and all but one of the top 30. Yet many country stations are still just playing one or maybe two of these songs in their current categories, and maybe another one or two in Stay Current or Power Recurrent categories. Don't get me wrong, most country programmers do understand that Morgan Wallen is the hottest thing in country, and because of that, they have the tightest artist separation rules on him. But many of them still have it set to 30 minutes when it should be 15 minutes or less. Weeks like this, you could turn it off altogether, which admittedly is the annoying part because we do have to be willing to let these separation rules ebb and flow and adjust them frequently based on what's currently happening. The challenge is, especially in country, we really like there to be 40 or so stars, with 10 to 15 of them being superstars. But in reality, what you see looking at the data is there's 6 superstars. Morgan Wallen's number 1 by a country mile, then Luke Combs, Zach Bryan, Shabuzi, Post Malone, and Jelly Roll are a distant 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. Yes, I include Zach Bryan in there, even though country radio tends to ignore him. The data shows he's one of the biggest stars in country despite the lack of love from country radio. So while it may make our logs look a lot cleaner to play 30 to 40 currents and do our best to only have one song by an artist in currents, if we do that, it will not accurately represent what our fans are listening to in our market. I know this is true because we don't only look at national data. For all the stations we consult, we look at market-level song data, and those things are even more true at the local level. For the record, the same thing applies to all other new music formats. It's just very clear who's in the top spot in country. Pop fluctuates and is dominated by whichever superstar has the latest new album out. But again, it isn't as thoroughly dominated by anyone as Morgan Wallen dominates in country. Hip-hop and R&B have been ruled by Kendrick Lamar and Drake over the past year, thanks to their feud and some great tunes. Rock and alternative are in flux with Sleep Token, The Marias, Linkin Park, Somber, and Hozier at the top. And by the way, rock programmers could do a better job adjusting their artist separation as well. Latin has a clear leader in Bad Bunny, while Forrest Frank, Brandon Lake, and Elevation Worship continue to lead the religious music formats. What do you think? How have you adjusted your artist separation rules, and what pushback, if any, have you gotten from the audience and those inside the building? Email me at andy@radiostationconsultant.com or editor@radioupdate.com and let me know. As always, if you have some thoughts you'd like to share on this or any other hot radio topic, submit an article about it by emailing submissions@radioupdate.com. Thanks for listening, watching, and reading. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Radio Influencers. Radio Influencers is a Radio Update production. New episodes are released on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.